Welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am James Just. With me is Mr. John Cameron, author of Rewire and what was it, John?
Rekill.
Rekills. There we go. And which is actually an interesting topic, John, because we're talking about the military draft. On military.com, there was an article. It's an opinion piece, so it's not an official article, but there's an opinion piece that we need a limited military draft. And with the ongoing troubles in Ukraine, in the Middle East, in NATO, and there's kind of talks about the escalation of a potential war, a draft is no longer out of the question, is it? And so
it is to me. But
well, it should be, right? You would think in any
Too
rational
old, man.
world. But are we? We got a later topic. Are we too old, John? If you're in Russia, you might not be too old. But before we get to that, is a draft actually a good idea? Or do we need a draft? I mean, you've got the military experience here, John, not me. So,
well, I joined the military right after the draft, at the end of the Vietnam era, and the Army did me some good, and a couple of times I almost got killed, but that was the nearest I could. Training accident once, and another time where there's a little echo going on there. Another time where I picked a fight with a Sicilian soccer team in a bar. But as far as and got this close to having to jump into Cyprus, which would have been a bad thing because there was 800 of us and 16,000 Russians fixing to jump into the same place. So we would have beat their ass. But anyway, no. So there's a bunch of ways to look at this. I know what's happening in the military as far as draft. There's a condition that they talk about, which is they can't get troops because everybody in the U.S. of young troop age is so fat and out of shape that they can't qualify. And the thing they don't talk about is they've mismanaged the military so poorly and subjected people in the military to bad strategic leadership, not bad tactical leadership. But look at what happened in Afghanistan. Just suddenly leaving all those people to fend for themselves and be executed after we basically went in and so that hit people morally, because I think 5,000 Americans lost their lives in Afghanistan. And that means another 20,000 were probably wounded over that 20-year war. I think longer than Vietnam, I think. And so, it was a gut punch to people in the military or people who were thinking about going in the military. And then they required all these people to get the vaccine. And if you didn't get the vaccine, they kicked you out, even with 10 years in or 15 years in, on a general discharge, which isn't as bad as a bad conduct discharge, but it means you don't get any VA benefits, you don't get retirement, you don't get credit for your service and all the rest of that. So, and the third thing is that we don't need, we only need to spend about a third of the money we're spending on the military to have an effective military, because we have Mexico and a bunch of other tough people and tough territory to the south. We have Canadians in the tundra to the north. We have the Atlantic Ocean to the east and the Pacific Ocean to the west. So it's not like it'd be easy for somebody to invade us. So why else do we need a military? Well, apparently, based on our history, we need a military to impose our way of life, which is now who knows what that is, and our will on the rest of the world, and to make sure our interests are served around the world. And all we really do is make fools of ourselves and get our young men and women killed, and then we get bored with it and move on. So we don't need a draft. Yeah, it would probably do people a lot of good from a personal service perspective to realize that to spend 2 to 4 years of their life doing exactly what they're told, and realize that that's the reality of the world. Sometimes you've got to do exactly as you're told. And that would be good, but I don't think we need to accomplish that with a draft.
No,
Did any of that make sense?
No, it all made perfect sense, John. I don't have actually anything I can actually add to it, other from my perspective, is the desire for a draft, I always wonder if it has more with the desire to kind of control culture, an attempt to try to control some sense of culture rather than it is actually the military aspect of it. I mean, we're not under any esoteric threat, right? There's no real, as you pointed out.
We are under a, what is it they call global warming, and even the UN says that there's no scenario where life on Earth is going to end, but all the environmental, they call it an existential threat. There is another existential threat out there that we're going to talk about in the next segment, I think, or in the last segment.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have talked about in the last.
We always, we go all over the place here, but actually all over the place. We got Mr. Richard Fields is out, and he has a conversation about Elon Musk and his companies, if his companies can be drafted, essentially. If a country can draft a company and their
employees.
And their employees, the employees' efforts, even if you're not actually in the country that is trying to draft you. So let's see what Richard has to say about this drafting of companies and Elon Musk.
Is Elon Musk subject to the draft in Ukraine? Is his company? Elon Musk is the CEO of SpaceX, which operates Starlink, a satellite internet service. Musk has provided Starlink service to Ukraine to stream battlefield video for intelligence gathering. He has personally refused to let Ukraine use Starlink for offensive purposes. That has included using Starlink to conduct long-range offensive strikes, in particular, drone strikes against Russian assets in the Black Sea. Ukraine is understandably upset. Ukraine presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak has said, the issue is that at critical stages of the war, we desperately need operational and technical independence. That is, the dependence of decision-making and its implementation must be 100%. The risks for our military are too great when the course of offensive operations depends on external circumstances or third parties. This presents an interesting question. Ukraine is at war with Russia, who invaded their country. The United States is not officially at war, but we are providing Ukraine with billions of dollars in arms and assisting with severe financial sanctions against Russia. Starlink is privately owned by Musk. He is under no legal obligation to volunteer use of his privately owned internet service to Ukraine any more than you are required to give Ukraine your shotgun. Musk has proposed peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Russia has said they would be willing to talk. The United States government has indicated its willingness to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. If any of the news stories about Hunter Biden peddling influence in Ukraine while his father was vice president are true, there may be some official Ukrainian arm twisting of Joe Biden's arm forthcoming to force Elon Musk to revise his terms of service. If that happens, know that the richest man in the world is still a tool of the American empire if the empire insists upon it.
Well spoken, Richard, as usual.
That leaves an interesting question. Have we been drafted? Have us as taxpayers been drafted into the war of Ukraine against our will? I mean, it's a question to be asked, and that we simply haven't been talking about it at all.
Yeah, I think I would love to see, taxation is basically theft anyway. So, the idea that if you take someone's assets from them and then use them to wage a war, are you being drafted? I mean, you could make a pretty good logical argument that's true. The government can do wacky things. I mean, if I were to hold you up at gunpoint and take 90, let's say $100 in your pocket, if I were to take 90 of it and leave, I'd be guilty of armed robbery. But if the government does that, it's not even a taking, according to the way they interpret the Constitution. As long as you got $10 left, they didn't take everything, so you still have some assets. So I think, yeah, our money's being drafted for sure
Yeah.
to,
Well, your labor is being drafted. You use your labor to earn that income, and now they're using that income
what income? I don't make any money.
to using that income to further their war. And then you are being drafted. Your labor is being drafted
My
to
labor's being
further the war.
drafted.
But what's interesting about this is the war in Russia is not actually going very well, because Russia is talking about raising their conscription age to 70.
Well, not really.
But yes.
That article is so misleading. So misleading. They're raising their conscription age to like 30. But if you're a retired military officer, if you're up to 70 years old, they can call you back in.
Yeah, they can call you back in if they need to. But these Russian laws, they're all really weird. They're just going to draft who they want to anyway. They're just going to go pull you off the streets.
Well, they draft a lot of non-Russians.
Non-Russians is what happens, right?
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at nefarious, we've done nefarious things in this country, but there's a theory out there that Putin came to power fighting Chechen rebels that supposedly killed 300 civilians with bombs, and there's a theory out there that it was basically I don't know, Richard would know the term, but a black op that Putin actually killed those 300 people and blamed it on the Chechens so that he could have a war and consolidate power. So we have no idea what's going on. I would say that this is all really just window dressing, shiny objects trying to distract people in America against the real existential threat that we talked about in the previous show, which is debt.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll get to the debt. Yeah, last show.
Yeah.
But what's interesting to me about this history of this Russian-Ukrainian thing is one of the reasons Ukrainians really despise Russians is because, that border area, what Stalin did was essentially allowed all those Russian peasants to die and then repopulated that area with
Ukrainian peasants.
Yes, we allowed all the Ukrainian peasants to die and then repopulated it with Russians.
Yeah.
And so there's a reason that this is such a heated debate.
And Ukraine is the basically the breadbasket of Europe, Eastern and Western Europe. So during the famines, Stalin and anybody that wants to choose between socialist central planning and capitalism needs to listen to these numbers. After collectivization was so inefficient that Stalin knew it was going to be inefficient. He knew that it wasn't going to be nearly as good as it was before, because all these middle-class farmers who owned their own land in the Ukraine produced a ton of food. So he set the quota basically a little bit higher than before collectivization, and they weren't allowed to basically eat anything until they hit their production quotas. So somewhere between 3 and 5 million of them starved to death, and it was basically state policy to do that, and then repopulated with Russians. In the Soviet Union, after collectivization, the farmers who were moved off their private land that they owned, it was very productive, were allowed to have a small plot. I think it's something like 1% of the land. On the small private plots that they managed themselves, they produced somewhere between 30 and 50% of the produce in the Soviet Union on 1% of the land. Whereas the collective farms, being centrally managed, like our whole economy is now, were grossly inefficient. So, when you talk about socialism, that's something to keep in mind. Capitalists produce, especially capitalists that own their own businesses, i.e. their own land. Just watch anybody that's opened a restaurant, and you'll know how hard people can work.
You're going to work harder for yourself than you will for the bureaucrat. You just will.
It's your family. You'll work hard to provide for your family, but not for Joe Blow, the tax man.
Yeah, you just won't. Yeah. So we're going to move on to about some taxes. Sacramento residents have been upset in the last few weeks for We call it military. I just like to call it military,
Militarization.
the militarization of police. And this is not really military equipment. I can get why you call it that,
It is.
but
It's
is it-
only necessary in a war. It's not, I mean, it's stuff that's designed for a warlike environment. It's not
I
designed
don't-
to keep the peace.
But I don't know if I'd call it military equipment. Those things they're talking about have no actual use in a military situation. The little bulldozer thing they got, I don't think they should have it, but I also want to call it military equipment because it's completely useless in a military situation. I mean, it just is.
It's overkill, and I underline the word kill,
Yeah.
in a something other than a police state. You don't need any of that stuff. We have SWAT teams and special weapons and tactics. Every town of over 10,000 people has a SWAT team and a hostage negotiator. And none of that stuff is necessary. I mean,
One bad thing happens, and so all of a sudden, and that is responded to poorly, right? Because of the lack of training and whatnot. So the response is,
hiring and
Yeah.
on and on. Lack of accountability.
bad luck is, bad
Bad
luck,
luck.
Is probably a bigger factor than any of us want to admit in some of these.
I run into some of that recently. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we had, for those of us in Sacramento, we remember the Good Guys, right? The Good Guys store. That's what kind of set Sacramento creating its SWAT team, right? Because they didn't really have a SWAT team before that.
Oh, the hostage situation,
The hostage situation
and the
and
good
the
guys.
good guys.
story, yeah.
And so that kind of set that whole thing going here. But we so much of what our events, and it costs so much, not just financially, but in terms of community engagement, community trust. The lack of trust in the community, we don't seem to understand that cost. That these communities now no longer trust the response of the police, partly because once we create these SWAT teams, we create these special teams, we give them all this unique equipment, they're gonna find ways to use it. Well, we've got it. It's just sitting there, doesn't
We
help
gotta
us.
use it, or else we
got-
can't justify next year's budget. Yeah.
We have to. How many
Let's
times
go
did we
kick
call
in
out?
some doors. Yeah.
How many times did you call this out? Well, we called it out 3 times.
Yeah.
Well, is 3 times, justifying this expense? Well, okay, so we're going to find a way to call it out 100 times a year.
Yes, our SWAT teams were utilized in Sacramento every single day last year.
Right.
Yeah.
Do we really need a SWAT team every
Well,
single?
there was a coyote
day.
that had to call in the SWAT team. Yeah.
Yeah.
Aggressive panhandling SWAT team. Burglaries? Oh, we don't respond to those.
Yeah, we don't respond to burglaries at all, but
Car
we will
thefts?
respond to
No.
a SWAT
Break-ins?
team.
No. Assaults? No. Murders? No. But yeah.
Yeah.
Anything that will get on the front page of the news. Yeah.
So you can understand why.
I shouldn't even say front page anymore. Nobody reads the newspaper except for my mother-in-law.
Well, then there's still a front page, John.
Yeah.
There is still a front page. It's just no one reads it.
No one reads it.
No one reads these things anymore. But again, I don't know. I get why people are upset. I just don't like them calling it military equipment because when I think of military equipment, I think
Well,
of actual military
would
equipment.
you be happy if we call it instead really expensive toys that the boys don't need to play with?
There you go.
All right.
I like
The
that
boys
one.
and girls don't need to play with.
They don't need these toys.
They don't need, the yos don't need to play with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More toys. Eric Adams in New York has
This is hilarious.
has warned that the migrant crisis is coming to a neighborhood near you, to his New York
No,
City.
I live in California, dude. You don't have to tell me about this stuff. We've been having this crisis for 50 years.
And that's what's really the irritating part about it, right? For the last 10, 15 years or so, a lot of people in Arizona, Texas, Southern California have
New
been
Mexico.
complaining about, the issues with
Florida.
the immigration crisis.
Louisiana, all the borders. Yeah. all the
And
borders.
people like Eric Adams have said, oh, it's not really a problem. Immigrants are a boon to your economy.
And they are, really.
And they are,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
they're allowed to work, which is actually a point he made. He makes a point that, well, they're not allowed to work. It's insane.
Yeah.
But you're the one who prevents them from working.
Yeah, you wrote the laws,
You
bro.
wrote all the laws. You're the one who demands all the laws, all the regulations that prevent people from actually easily able to work.
He's upset about, what is it, like 10,000,
Yeah.
something like that? And how many people cross the border into Texas and New Mexico and
Uncountable
Arizona? 10,000 a day.
Yeah.
Probably.
But somehow New York City, with its, what, 10
At least
million, 8.5
5,000.
million people, 10 million
Can
people, whatever it is,
absorb,
can
yeah.
absorb 8 to 10,000 people somehow.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's something very, very.
I mean, we could, but you know, all the government workers that are no longer going into the office, just put them up there.
Well,
They're unused anyway. They're a little dusty. But, you know,
solve the actual problem and allow these
Yeah.
people to work.
yeah.
You
Well,
remove the
allow-
barriers that are preventing the migrants from taking care of themselves, and it will actually help our country and our
Yeah,
economy and the migrants.
Or even cut out one layer of management in every government bureaucracy that you have, and take those dollars and hire them to do public works. Hire them with tax dollars to sweep the streets, to paint stuff, to, I don't know, deliver care packages to people who are housebound. I mean, I'll tell you what, if you took the money from one layer of management in any government agency in any state and gave that money to a church, and I'm a pagan, I'm not Christian, but a church, and said, you have all these people here, provide for them enough so that they have a place to sleep at night, and food, and clothes on their back, and basic medical care, and then put them to work. Within a week, they would have it organized. But these government agencies can't do it ever.
Well, it's because they're not incentivized
'Cause they don't want to.
Well, yeah, they're not
They don't want
incentivized to.
Well, they're incentivized to grow the department that's supposed to deal with the problem that they created.
Yeah, if they fix the problem, they're out of jobs.
Yes, can't
And
do
so
that.
they're never going to fix the problem because why would they want to?
I think we've said that a number of times on this show.
I think it's a recurring
That's a
theme.
big number.
And here's another recurring theme that we're going to talk to, how the U.S. government has widened the wealth gap between whites and blacks. And essentially what it's talking about is how the government zoning regulations, essentially, prevented black people from back in the 40s, FDR, prevented black people from buying homes when they were cheap.
But FDR was a Democrat.
It's it's amazing how many people can look back in history and see how oppressive, racist the government is, and then say the solution of it is more government.
Oh, yeah.
How can you
Well-
sit there and complain about the systemic racism and then say the solution to
we
that
need
is
more systemic
more
racism.
systemic
Yeah,
racism,
yeah.
more of the oppressive system? It just boggles my mind.
Dr. Martin Luther King would be a little upset about that when he was yearning for the day when people were judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. And now we're judging everybody by the color of their skin, which is immutable. People can change their sex day to day, but apparently you can't change your race, which I don't understand. Yeah.
I always go back to this. My grandchildren are of many races. And so anytime someone talks about the racial issues, I just ask a simple question: what race are my grandchildren? Are they black? Are they white? Are they Asian? Are they Hispanic? What are they?
Many.
They're human.
And coat of many colors, Dolly Parton song.
And so if we don't,
Child of many races.
yeah,
Yeah.
if we don't treat them as human, we're going to have to at some point get to the point where we treat everybody as human. Because
And the reason that the government is so insistent upon doing systemic racism now is because young people don't see race. People of my age see race. People of your age see race, but young people don't see race. People who are like 5 to 25, unless they're raised, I don't know where they'd be raised to see race. They don't even. It doesn't even register. The
No.
race of someone does not register. So unless the government can force them to be focused on it, they won't have control over them when they continue to vote, which is the whole idea behind the stuff, is to create strife, is to create furor, is to take from one part and have them be upset, to give to another group, to have them be upset that you had to give them something. And so the government is fomenting racism. But anyway, the stuff that FDR did and all the other politicians to ensure that, after World War II, all the wealth that was available, homes for veterans, VA education, it's the boom time of the universe, basically, was people having wealth in their homes. It's still the greatest source of wealth, but for white people it is, not for black people. you know, and that was done through government policy. And so the idea, as you said so eloquently, we want to give more power to the people who created this mess to fix the mess. They have no interest in fixing it.
No,
No.
there's not a lick of evidence that there's any desire for this problem to actually be fixed.
No.
Because if you've spent, what is it, 80 years now trying to fix this problem, and you're not even close to solving the problem, it actually appears to be getting worse, at least if you look around. If you look, it appears to be getting worse. I think you're right. When you go down and you talk to the younger people,
It's actually not. Though.
it's not worse.
If you, they're
The
people
activists
in
are worse.
people in power, they're louder and they're getting more press, but it's because that's what sells. I was going to say sells newspapers. That's clickbait.
Yeah.
You know, if you can get people upset and worried, they click on stuff and then they see the ads, and then they go buy stuff. And then if you can get people really upset and they go to bed upset every day and they say, "Oh, I don't want to go to bed afraid and upset. I want the government to protect me." They're protecting you from nothing. And, you know, I think that these so-called progressives, the reason they're not pursuing the crimes that everybody wants them to, if you ask people, let's say in low-income neighborhoods, what crimes do you want the police to focus on? They would say property crimes and personal crimes. I want you to go after people who are doing the assaults. I want you to go after people who are burglarizing these businesses so they can't make a profit and they're closing their doors. You know, we don't have any grocery stores in our neighborhood now because people just go in and take the stuff and leave and the cops don't do anything. People want grocery stores. They don't want woke activism or conservative activism. They don't want social experimentation. They want cops to take care of their property and their person, and they're not doing it, especially in places where there's progressive DAs. And I think they're doing that just to make sure people are upset. So eventually they'll do whatever the government tells them to.
Well, there's a marketing strategy that we now call fan baiting. It's where you deliberately go off and you deliberately piss off your fans, so you create engagement, right? And that's a marketing strategy. And I think it started in politics, and then now it's gone on to entertainment and movies. But yeah, you're exactly correct. They use your anger. They use your
No, we didn't even get to the funny bit of it.
they use your anger to get at you. Yeah, I know it's been on there for like a month now. We still haven't gotten to the Twitter users are mad because apparently sleep is racist.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you, John, for being here.
Appreciate
Please remember to love everybody.
It was a fast show. I enjoyed it. Yeah.
And good night.
Thank you so much.